He was my daughter's ex. But the way he looked at me made me forget everything. Today I have a story that took me by surprise in ways I still can't fully explain. I thought I was just babysitting, helping out, doing a favor. Nothing more. I didn't expect anything unusual. But then, something shifted. It wasn't the child that caught me off guard. It was him, the father. The way he looked at me spoke to me. The way his presence made me feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't about lust. It was something deeper, something dangerous. He didn't just notice me, he reminded me I was still a woman. And from that moment on, everything changed. What happened next will stay with me forever. Are you ready to hear what unfolded? When my daughter introduced him, he was just another charming young man passing through her life. I had smiled politely, played the role of the supportive mother, and thought little of him beyond that day. But months later, when I opened the door and found him standing there alone, older, somehow changed his eyes, met mine with a quiet intensity that made the air shift around us. It was not wrong, but it was not right either. In that single charged moment, the weight of what we were supposed to be melted into the warmth of what we could not deny. I had almost forgotten his name. After the breakup, my daughter barely spoke about him. She had deleted his pictures, blocked his number, and declared herself over it with the kind of dramatic finality only a 25-year-old could summon. I supported her, of course. I told her she deserved better, that heartbreak was temporary, and that life had a strange way of giving us what we needed when we least expected it. What I did not expect was him standing on my porch in the middle of a rainy Tuesday afternoon, holding a small, soggy box and a half-smile that still had the power to disarm. "Hi, Mrs. Connors," he said, his voice lower, more grounded than I remembered. I should have closed the door. I should have reminded him that it was inappropriate to show up here. I should have asked him to leave. Instead, I blinked once, stepped aside and let him in. He said he had found a few of my daughter's things while cleaning out his apartment. An old journal, a necklace she used to wear, a few Polaroids. He had been meaning to return them, he said, and just never got around to it. But the way he lingered in my foyer, hands tucked into his jacket, eyes scanning the same living room he used to sit in awkwardly while waiting for her, told me there was more to this visit. I offered him tea. He accepted. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one that had once heard my daughter laughing too loudly at his jokes, but this time there was no laughter, just the sound of soft rain tapping the windows and two people who had no business being alone together. He looked older, wiser. There was something quieter in his energy, something softer around the edges. "I never got the chance to thank you," he said, "for always being kind to me when we were together." I smiled. "It was easy. You were a good influence on her at the time." "At the time," he echoed with a dry chuckle. Then he looked down into his cup. "You always seemed to understand me more than she did." That line lingered in the air longer than it should have. I swallowed hard and looked away, pretending to be interested in the rain. We did not talk much about my daughter after that. Instead, we talked about life, his job, my freelance work, the book I had been meaning to finish. The way time seemed to speed up after 40. It was strange how easily the conversation flowed. I realized I had not felt this scene in a long time. He did not make me feel young, and I did not want him to. What unsettled me was how he made me feel present. Like a woman with thoughts, desires, and emotions that had nothing to do with being someone's mother. When he stood to leave, I walked him to the door. It should have ended there, but he hesitated. His eyes lingered on mine, searching. His breath was slow, intentional. "Can I ask you something?" he said, voice soft but firm. I nodded, barely trusting my own. "Back then, did you ever feel something between us, even if it was just a moment?" Time stilled. The air turned thick with unspoken truths. I should have said no. I should have laughed it off, changed the subject, reminded him of who I was supposed to be in this story. But I could not lie. Not to him and not to myself. There was a moment I whispered, "Only one." But I buried it. His expression changed, like someone had just unlocked a part of him he had been trying to forget. He took a step closer, then another. He did not touch me. He did not need to. The tension between us was so palpable, it hummed in the space like a slow-burning fuse. I wanted to step back, but I also wanted to stay. I was not supposed to feel this way. I was a mother. I was older. I was wiser. But at that moment, I was just me, and I had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted for simply being that. He reached for the door handle, paused, and turned back one last time. "I will not come back," he said, "unless you ask me to." Then he walked out, leaving me standing there, heart racing past and future colliding, in a moment I never saw coming. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face at the door, heard his voice asking if I had ever felt something, replayed the way his eyes lingered on mine like he was reading a secret I had tried to hide for years. I tossed and turned, arguing with myself. It was foolish, irresponsible, dangerous. But beneath every rational reason was a quiet hum, a warmth I had not felt in years. I was not trying to fall into something. I was just tired of always standing still. The next morning I did something I had not done in a while. I got dressed like I wanted to be seen. Not for a man, not for validation, but for myself. A fitted blouse, a touch of perfume I had long stopped wearing, and a lipstick that had not touched my lips since my divorce. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I had buried under years of motherhood responsibility and silence. She looked back at me, nervous but alive. I stared at my phone for hours, fingers hovering over his number. I did not even realize I had saved it again. All it took was a single message. "If you meant what you said, come back tonight." I hit send, heart pounding in my chest, and immediately placed the phone down as if it were about to explode. The weight nearly unstrung me. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car outside, every flicker of the hallway light sent waves through my chest. At exactly 8:17 p.m., I heard the knock. This time, I did not hesitate. He stood there in a dark gray sweater, hair slightly damp from the evening drizzle, eyes lit with a softness that made it impossible to shut the door in his face. I stepped aside again, and this time it felt deliberate. There was no box in his hand, no excuse, just him and the unspoken tension we had both invited. We sat again, not in the kitchen, but on the couch. Closer than we had any right to be. His leg brushed mine and neither of us moved. We talked, but this time it was not about my daughter or the past or the safe pleasantries we had rehearsed. It was about the space between now and never. He asked me about the last time I had felt touched, not just physically, but emotionally. I told him the truth. It had been years. Not since my marriage ended. Not since my walls went up, I had been functioning. Surviving but never truly feeling. He looked at me like he could see all of it, not just the woman in front of him but the one I had been hiding. Then slowly he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed my cheek and my breath caught. We were both trembling, unsure of how far this should go or if it should go at all. But the moment had already chosen us. His hand rested gently on my jaw, and his lips hovered, asking for permission. Without words, I gave it with a glance. The kiss was not rushed. It was hesitant, slow, a conversation without voices. I felt my whole body soften into it. Years of built-up restraint melting into a single point of contact. His hand moved to the small of my back, pulling me closer, and I let myself. When we finally pulled apart, we stayed close, foreheads touching, breath mingling. "This should not feel this right," I whispered. "I know," he said, eyes still closed, "but it does." We moved to the bedroom not because of lust, but because the couch felt too fragile to hold what we were about to let happen. Every movement was deliberate. Clothes fell not in frenzy, but in understanding. He looked at me like a woman, not a label, not someone's mother, not someone older, just a woman. And I looked at him not as my daughter's ex, not as someone inappropriate, but as someone who saw me, really saw me. What happened between us that night was not just physical, it was emotional, it was raw and messy and impossibly beautiful. It was two people who should not have found each other, finding something they did not know they had been needing all along. There was a reverence in his touch. He asked if I was okay. He listened to my breaths, my silences. He kissed my stretch marks. He traced my skin like it was something worth reading. Afterwards, we lay in silence, sheets tangled between us, the world outside forgotten. I looked up at the ceiling and felt tears prick my eyes, not out of guilt, but out of fear. What now? What did this mean? Had we just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? He sensed it. "I do not want to make this complicated for you," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "but I do not regret it." Not for a second, I turned to face him. Neither do I. We stayed like that for a while, close quiet, letting the moment hold us. He did not stay the night. He kissed me once more at the door, this time on the forehead, and promised that he would not push, that he would wait if I wanted him to, and then he left. I closed the door behind him and stood there, the silence loud with everything we had shared. Something had shifted inside me. This was not a love story I had expected, not one I would have ever written for myself, but it was real, and sometimes that is more than enough. The days after that night were filled with an unfamiliar kind of silence, one that hummed with questions I was too afraid to ask. I moved through my routine like I always had, morning coffee, emails, folded laundry, answering calls, but every moment felt like I was only half present. The other half of me was still wrapped up in that night, in the heat of his breath, the softness of his words, the way he made me feel seen in a way I had not in years. But guilt has a quiet voice, and it speaks when the world goes still. It was not just the fact that he was younger or that he had once loved my daughter. It was the knowledge that what we had done, no matter how honest it felt in the moment, came with consequences. I started to look over my shoulder more. I kept my phone on silent. I read every message, twice, dreading the one that might say, "Mom, did something happen between you and Evan?" But she never asked, and he never texted, not for 2 days. By the third day, the silence turned from peaceful to painful. I tried to convince myself that it was for the best, that maybe we had shared something that was meant to stay where it belonged in the past, between shadows and unspoken longing. But my heart was not listening. It ached in his absence. I caught myself rereading our last exchange, overanalyzing every word, wondering if I had imagined the entire connection, and just when I was about to convince myself to bury it all, I saw his name light up on my phone. "Can I see you?" Just 4 words. But they cracked something wide open again. I did not respond right away. I stared at the screen, heart racing, hands trembling. Part of me wanted to say no, to be wise, cautious, self-protective. But there was another part, the part that had smiled for the first time in years. When he looked at me, that part picked up the phone and simply typed, "Tonight he came just after dusk. I had lit a few candles. Not for him, but for the mood I had not realized I was trying to hold on to." He entered quietly like he had done something wrong. And maybe he had. Maybe we both had. But when our eyes met, the noise fell away. "I was not sure if you would respond." He said, his voice barely louder than a whisper. I almost didn't. I replied honestly, "But I haven't stopped thinking about you." He took a seat across from me, but it felt like there was a wall between us now. Something unspoken, something that needed to be addressed before we could breathe freely again. "I need to ask," I said slowly. "What is this to you? Was that night just something you needed to get out of your system, or does it mean something?" He looked stunned at first, like I had caught him off guard. Then he leaned forward, elbows on knees, gaze fixed on mine. "It meant everything." He said, "That night being with you was the first time I felt real in months, maybe longer. And I know it's complicated. I know people would not understand, but I'm not here because of what people think. I'm here because I cannot stop wanting to know who you are when no one's watching." I swallowed hard. My throat was dry, my chest tight. I was not used to being spoken to like that, not anymore. "But what about her?" I asked, referring to my daughter, my voice thick with unspoken fear. He did not flinch. "Your daughter and I were over a long time ago. You know that? And I'd never hurt her. This isn't about disrespecting her. It's about acknowledging what's real between you and me." I nodded, tears threatening the corners of my eyes, because as much as I wanted to protect everyone, I also realized how long I had been hiding behind responsibility, never allowing myself to feel anything that might shake my carefully constructed world. And now here it was, cracked wide open, honest, messy, beautiful. He stood up and walked over, kneeling in front of me like he wanted me to see him. Not just the younger man who had once dated my daughter, but someone who now saw me as something more than a role. His hands found mine warm and steady. "You do not have to choose anything tonight," he said softly, "but I need you to know I'm not walking away unless you tell me to." I closed my eyes and let his words sink in. I felt scared, but I also felt alive. This was not the safe path. This was not the expected choice. But sometimes love, or the beginnings of it, does not come when you plan. It comes when you least expect it, dressed in mistakes and second chances. When I opened my eyes again, I met his gaze and whispered, "Then stay." And for the first time in years, I stopped running. The following morning, sunlight poured through the curtains in soft golden ribbons. I stirred gently, waking not just from sleep, but from years of quiet resignation. He was still beside me, one arm draped protectively over my waist, his breathing deep and steady. It should have felt strange. It should have made me second-guess everything, but instead, it felt right. There was no rush to speak, no need to define anything too quickly. What happened between us had not erased the complications of life, but it had revealed something I had long forgotten the right to feel, to want to begin again. I knew that the world outside that room might never understand, my daughter, my family. Even I would need time to process it all, but for once I was not choosing out of fear, I was choosing out of truth. He eventually stirred, turning to face me, a sleepy smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Morning," he whispered, as if afraid to break the spell of quiet honesty between us. "Morning," I replied, brushing his hair back gently, and in that silence, something unspoken passed between us. A promise, perhaps, or a mutual understanding that whatever this was, it was not just about last night. It was about healing, about rediscovery, about seeing each other as we truly were. We lay there for a while longer, holding each other not as mistakes, not as regrets, but as two people finally brave enough to feel. I walked into that house thinking I was just there to help out, watch a child, do a job, nothing more. But somehow in the quiet moments between diaper changes, bedtime stories, and polite conversation, something stirred inside me that I hadn't felt in years. He didn't touch me. He didn't cross any obvious line. But the way he looked at me, the attention he gave me, the warmth in his words, it reminded me I was still a woman, not just a helper, not just someone forgotten. But here's where it gets complicated. Was I wrong for feeling something? Was he wrong for giving me that look? Was it just human connection, or was it emotional temptation wrapped in polite conversation? Some people will say I read too much into it. Others might say emotional intimacy can be just as powerful and just as risky as anything physical. So I ask you, where is the line between being seen and being seduced? Between appreciation and danger? Let me know what you think in the comments. Be honest, would you have felt the same, or walked away without giving it a second thought? Follow me so I have more motivation to create emotional, thought-provoking stories like this, or simply encourage me by pressing #1 in the comments. Your support truly means the world.